Welcome to the BuiltOnAir podcast, the variety show for all things Airtable. In each episode, we cover 4 different segments. It's always fresh and different, and lots of fun while you get the insider info on all things Airtable. Our hosts and guests are some of the most senior experts in the Airtable community. Join us live each week on our YouTube channel every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and join our active community at BuiltOnAir.com. Before we begin, a word from our sponsor, On2Air Backups. On2Air Backups provides automated Airtable backups to your cloud storage for secure and reliable data protection. Prevent data loss and set up a secure Airtable backup system with On2Air Backups at On2Air.com. As one customer, Sarah, said, having automated Airtable backups has freed up hours of my time every other week and the fear of losing anything. Longtime customer David states, On2Air Backups might be the most critical piece of the puzzle to guard against unforeseeable disaster. It's easy to set up, and it just works. Join Sarah, David, and hundreds more Airtable users like you to protect your Airtable data with On2Air Backups. Sign up today with promo code BuiltOnAir for a 10% discount. Check them out at On2Air.com. And now let's check out today's episode and see what we built on air.
All right, welcome back to Season 20, Episode 4 of the Built on Air podcast. Good to be with you. We've got a full house today. Myself, Dan Fellers. We've got Alli and Camille Parks and special guest Cherry. Welcome back, Cherry.
Thank you. Good to be
Had
back.
you on a few times in the past. Good to see you again. And we actually all saw each other in person, so we're going to be talking about that last week's Daretable. So that's a big thing that we'll be talking about today. So let me run us through real quick what we're going to be covering today, and then we'll jump right in. We always, it's an hour-long show, keep you up to date on everything Airtable. So we start with our Round the Bases, what's going on in all the Airtable communities, what's new. And then shout out to our sponsor, On2Air Backups. And then we will have Sherry talk about how to use Airtable for the education industry. And then we'll have Alli talk about Junction Tables. And then how to join our community. Get Sherry back in here. And then Camille's going to go through approvals, processes, and advanced stuff on that front. So with that, let's start with the big news of Daretable last week. We were all there Friday in Manhattan, New York. And impressions. What do you guys think?
Awesome.
It was great.
So shout out to the AV team because everything just ran real smooth, and there were a lot of good sessions from both consultants and people in the community, and Airtable themselves. Good time.
Yep. Yeah, it was a one-day event, packed with lots of speakers and presentations, and Airtable was much more heavily involved this time than years past. So emceed it, Chris Dancy put it all together with Ben Green, and it was great. We're probably some of the few that have been to most, if not all, the previous Daretables. And there was a lot of new people when they asked who had been there. So a lot of new people.
Yeah, I got to see familiar faces and meet people I hadn't met before. A lot of people got to see their clients, or conversely got to see the consultants that they've hired to help them out on some Airtable builds, and that's always fun to actually see the person who's helped you out or who you're helping in person.
Yep. Very good. So the three of this crew, minus myself, we're all speakers, presenters, and we're actually going to get a glimpse into what they all talked about. So that'll be good. So that today's show is kind of a recap of that. So if you missed Daretable, this will be a good summary of the 3 best presentations at Daretable, if I do say so myself. Very good. Besides the 3 of you all, what was your favorite presentation?
I really like Dan's, the Airtable IT team. I thought he had a lot of good information to cover. It really went from Airtable not using Airtable at all to Airtable using Airtable. And it's nice to know that there are advocates within the company who are trying to get their like internal employees skilled up and more confident in using the tool.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I didn't get to see that one, but I heard good things about it.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked Kavan's, of course, always knocking out of the park. She talked about paired programming and all the benefits of having somebody sit alongside you and help you out with user acceptance testing and being able to provide another side of the knowledge for the business, which was really relatable and interesting to hear someone else's take on.
I liked during Scare Table, which is a period of the conference where basically anyone in the crowd can sign up to do a quick, I think it's 5 or so minutes demo of something they've built in Airtable. That's always fun because it's always incredibly random. And one of them, Julian Post, fixture in the Airtable community, his was about a system to help remind him when to move his car for street sweeping. And I was like, yeah, all right. It was laid out really well and like all of the different factors that you have to think about. And yeah, Airtable, use it for everything.
I loved his. I loved the like little drawing he had with all the air on the days. It was so cute.
Because it sounds like it would be simple, and it's not, apparently.
Right. I also really liked Marcus Garrett. He had rebuilt the game of Yahtzee inside of Airtable, which was awesome. And he like played it live for everyone. So it was really, really cool. Super creative.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah, I loved that one.
Yeah, one I missed that I need to watch on the live feed was Ben Bailey's enterprise scaling.
That one was great.
I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I'm going to watch that one. Need to watch that this week. So awesome. So yeah, it was great. And they did preview, I don't know how much can be shared, but portals, they talk about it on their website. So they did make that public. Maybe not all the details on everything, but that was interesting to see how that comes out. And pricing is not final yet, so that will be interesting. Trying to think if there is any other feature announcements that we haven't already talked about.
There was a session on Product Central, which I went to, and I now understand what it is. There's some things that I wasn't necessarily a fan of. It did seem like there's still a base underneath it. All of the sort of promotional images are all interface-like, but they said that you would be able to get into the base underneath it all and add on to it and customize it. So that's great. But there are a lot of interface elements that you can see in the sort of images that they've been sharing, and people asked, will we be eventually able to add those elements to a normal interface, not part of Product Central? And at the time, it's not necessarily on the roadmap. So that's a little disheartening. So, it's still pretty focused in terms of like you got to work in product for Product Central to be useful for you. So that kind of goes without saying, but they did say that they are going to try and make similar products for other major use cases. I assume marketing is on the list because I feel like everyone uses it in some way, shape, or form for a marketing team. So maybe they'll have a Marketing Central in the future.
Yeah, it seems like that's their strategy. Marketing, sales, IT, HR. I bet they create a whole suite of them. That's interesting. So if you can get access to the base, you could likely create your own interfaces inside that base as well. So I wonder if the product is a base. It's probably only one base, so you can't create other bases, but you can do what you can do in Airtable in that base.
That was my understanding, yeah. So You might be able to have, there's a lot of like pre-built pages in there for you. So if you ignore those, you can create your own pages on the interface side. So I don't know if those pages that you can create include those newer elements, but if they do, then you could, in theory, customize it to something that's not product focused. It might feel like a waste though, because of all of the extra sort of infrastructure that's baked in for that purpose.
Yeah, interesting. Very good. Well, if you didn't make it to this year's Daretable, they did announce where next year is going to be and the dates. So Chicago, Illinois, October 17th next year, 2025. So you can already get your pre-sale tickets for that. So that'll be good. I plan to be there.
Absolutely.
And, good. So I'm glad they're still moving forward with it, and we'll be in Chicago. So join us for next year. All right, let's move on from the BuiltOnAir community. This was something I'm not sure. So Dominic is saying, not sure how new this is, but just noticed that you can now see the filters applied to a locked view by clicking on the filter button without needing to unlock it first. It used to be the filter button was disabled if the view was locked. Any idea how long that's been around?
I've had access for a while, but I can't tell if it was like an enterprise only thing. I simply don't know, but I've been able to see this for quite some time. But it is very useful because you don't want to keep locking and unlocking views just to sort of see its settings. Mm-hmm. And some settings you can't see via the API either. So you really have to go in and to the UI and click on these buttons. So it is nice that they did add this.
Yeah.
Certainly.
All right, next one. Here's another competitor I hadn't heard of. Teeable, not sure how do you say that. They have cross base linking, so like a linked record, but inside of another base. So that's kind of cool. Let's see.
My coworker did tell me about this, and I think one of its draws was, it's Postgres underneath. So if you're familiar with Postgres, it's kind of like bridges the gap. I think a lot of people who are more developer minded kind of want, a real database, a SQL, but with like a nice UI on top of it. And something like Table might be a good, middleman. You'll notice its header, it looks very similar to Airtables in terms of like hidden fields, and then it's filter, and then it's sort, and then it's group. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess there's only so much you can do. We talk about all of these other sort of alternatives, but I think this one is also, if not open source, it's self-hostable. I can't remember which.
Yeah, it says it has an open source version.
Yeah, I'm very lenient on anything open source. So,
it's almost like if Notion and Airtable had a baby.
I could see that. They have very similar, the UI, the like design of it does feel very Notion-like. So I see a tab for extensions and API. So I guess if you're, if you like scripting and you like integrating, maybe look at it. One day when I have time, I'll look at things.
Yeah, that's the new one. There's several open source ones that are out there that seem to be sticking around, getting traction. So
mobile friendly. Wait a minute. Well, that's good because Airtable's mobile experience is an interesting, adventure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting.
That's neat. I like that they don't have record limits.
Yeah. If you're running it.
That comes up more in conversation with our clients than it used to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. There's an alternative if you're looking for something. Okay. So speaking of Notion, we talked last time, Notion is expanding, or sorry, that was Softer. Softer now supports Notion, but Notion has just added forms. So they're kind of moving more and more overlapping with Airtable. So you can now generate forms that can be external facing, public, that can get data into your Notion database. So that's interesting. I am actually surprised that they didn't have this before.
I was about to say, like, is that new? That's crazy that you don't have forms. A lot of speaking of open source alternatives to Airtable, a lot of them have forms. I know Base Row has forms, even if they're pretty simple. Airtable forms were pretty simple for like 8 years. So It's surprising that Notion just now added them.
Yeah, and then one more from Notion. They're now more overlap. They're really trying to compete. So now they have automations built in. So another step towards competing with Airtable. Interesting. I know they acquired an automation company a year or so ago, and I think they shut it down and kind of incorporated all that functionality. Looks like inside of Notion. Yeah. So that'll be interesting as Notion might start to compete more directly.
It makes sense. We did have a question from the comments, guessing that the recap videos are only available for attendees. That is in reference to the Daretable conference. It was streamed, and when I say it, there were multiple stages in the venue. All of the main stage talks were streamed, so you could see Alli and I, and several of the ones that we referenced earlier as some of our faves. On the website for Daretable, there are tickets for getting the video on demand and streaming. I think you could still get them, and that'll give you access to the full video. As far as I know, it's one very long video. I think it's 9 hours, so you kind of have to scroll. If you look at the agenda, you'll be able to guess wherein any particular session takes place.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, a few more here. Here's a live example coming up on Election Day. So that's next week, a week from today, I believe. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're using Airtable to find wait times at election booths, voting sites. So Wake County, not sure where that Raleigh, so that's North Carolina. So they're using Airtable. So that's cool to see Airtable out in the wild for Election Day. And then finally, for some humor, this is if Airtable kept it real. So their current tagline on the main website is digital operations for the AI era, and crossed everything out except tables, and then just says put things in rows, find them later. Airtable kept it real.
Nice.
I like it.
Awesome. That is, I think, everything up to date on Airtable and all the communities. And I think a lot of people were out there in New York. Pictures are out there on LinkedIn. I should have we've got a picture with me, Camille, and Alli that we took. And so I'll put that maybe on our website in the community. So it's great to see everybody there. And we have people come up to us and listen to the show every week. We love it. So that was cool. We had our groupies following us. Not true. There was a few. That is a true story.
Very nice.
Yeah. All right. Shout out. If you are running your business on Airtable, it's best practice to keep it backed up, keep your data outside of just Airtable for dual storage. So that's where Ontoair comes in. Back up your data to Box, Dropbox, or Google Drive, and more destinations coming soon. Also have the ability to restore your data back into Airtable, into an existing base or a new base. and make sure that your data is secure and backed up, and you can sleep peace of mind. So check it out on ontoair.com. Use promo code BuiltOnAir for a discount and start backing up your data today. Okay, Cherry, going to show us. You had some presented at Daretable on this topic, and if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, happy to. Just starting with a bit of humor. Let's see, sharing tips.
And Cherry, why don't you also, you've been on the show a few times, but give us context, who you are, what you're up to.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm Cherry. I'm the founder of Clarity Base. We have been around for 5 years, which in this industry feels like the longest time. We create databases that help teams find clarity in their processes and workflows. Yeah. Just starting off with a bit of humor. My friend sent me this yesterday. I thought the Airtable community might appreciate it when someone tells you they want to use a Junction database.
I love it.
Yeah. And all right. You know what? I was just looking up convergent evolution when we were talking about all the different tools, seemingly starting to have all the same features.
Yeah.
Reminding a bit of my biology class from ages ago. So I did present at Daretable, getting into the actual content here. I did present at Daretable. We talked about Airtable for EDU, so education institutions, mostly K-12 or post-secondary institutions, and provided a couple of different examples that we've worked on for various different just post-secondary education institutions. I think often there's this admin team that's doing a lot of the background work to help with everything that's behind the scenes from an operations perspective. So there were 2 demos that I shared. One was a medical faculty grant management database, and then the second was event and comms management. So both of these types of projects we've done a ton of work on and have just taken some of the common themes through past client projects and have shared them. So in the back end of the base, it's a pretty simple database, and we're sharing these as templates where you have your different portfolios of grants. This particular case is for medical faculty. You have your portfolio and then professors related to potential applicants. You have your applications themselves, the grants, the funding disbursements, and reviewers. In terms of an interface, we've got just a workflow from everything being submitted to under review to being approved, and then to being approved or rejected. There's this workflow that comes in when the form gets submitted. There's also a funding disbursement. So once a grant application is approved, you can actually track all the disbursements that are going to get paid out over time, because that's another element that gets tracked in a ton of different spreadsheets. And then we've got this grant overview, so you can see through all of your different portfolios, whether it's different faculties within the field of medicine or specific topics. You can see how much funding was allocated, how much money was committed, how much funding is remaining, and then also just the amount of money that's been dispersed. And I think the beauty of Airtable is that it ties all of these processes together. And then last but not least, you can also see all of your reporting at a very high level where you can see your grant funding in its like total amount, how much is committed, what's been dispersed across all of the different portfolios that you're looking at. So it's nice to be able to see grant funding at different altitudes. Often you'll have a team that is managing each portfolio, but then a few executives that's overseeing all the portfolios across the entire faculty. So you can look at this based on specific portfolios if you want to drill down deeper, and it's just a nice way to one, get all of your information in one place, and then to really have a good sense of where all the allocation and funding is at. I'm just going to pull up a slide here as well. Oh, okay. The right place. Yes. Just going to share one of my slides here. So with our clients who adopt this kind of system, often where they come from is this space where they've got a bunch of different systems, like probably 30 different spreadsheets for all the different steps they have to manage. So intake forms are, for clients, they did it through SurveyMonkey, and then that came into spreadsheets so that they could send it out to the different reviewers. And if each portfolio has 5 different reviewers, you're looking at sending out and receiving back 30 different spreadsheets. And then that gets combined into more spreadsheets. Then you're sending out separate spreadsheets on a monthly basis around disbursements, and also just reporting on what's been decided, which grants have been approved, rejected, and what's the disbursement over time. So getting everything into Airtable, you really get a single source of truth in one place without having to do all this manual work in spreadsheets.
Yeah, just the spreadsheets of it all. I think that it's not just education, it's a lot of different industries that are, relying heavily on several loosely connected spreadsheets. And it's always nice to, I think, hear, oh, wait a minute, we can actually put all this information in one place.
Yeah, and for our client, it was just incredible because they used to have these like an hour and a half long weekly meetings with 15 people in the call, and they would just go through each one of their portfolios and talk about updates. And after they got Airtable, that meeting turned into 45 minutes, and then they were actually solving problems because the data was actually just readily available.
Awesome.
All right. Do we have time for one more, or is there?
Yeah, I think we do.
Awesome.
Yeah, let's see one more.
Great. So this next one is more of a events and comms data management. Again, like the build out itself is fairly simple in Airtable, but what I'm really trying to share is just a foundation template for people to build from. So inside of our interfaces here, we've done lots of work for clients where we've built a centralized like events or comms calendar, and every single events and comms team, in this case they were 2 separate teams but worked very closely together. There's sub teams within a comms team, and then often again they're using different tools for managing projects, and there's a lot of ad hoc communication. So for the events team, whenever they approved something, they had to tell the comms team to put out invites, social posts, when the event was actually happening. And then if anything got updated, it was the same thing. There was a lot of just ad hoc communication going back and forth, which didn't work for everyone. So inside of Airtable, they have this, again, education example. They have different departments organizing events, so you can color code all of your events based on which department they're from. And then you can also look at the different pieces of communication that's planned or published or in draft right now. So if I look at my example from last week, I can see, or that was showing last week, I can see that there's information about this particular example. When I click into the interfaces, I can see exactly which pieces of communication are going out. And then coming into our events dashboard, you can see the number of events, the reporting on who's attended, how many people have attended, and just metrics to show execs and leadership so that you can bring more visibility into the work that the team is doing. And then a comms workflow, I've built 2 different interfaces. The first one is just every day I can come into work and see what it is I need to do. So this is a pretty straightforward interface to just show my tasks for the day. I can see that I've got some things that are in draft, some things that are submitted for review, and other things need revisions. And I can flip this back and forth, so I can submit this for review. And for my reviewer, I also have a different dashboard for the reviewer where they can come in every morning and look at what it is that they need to review. So for the reviewer, if there are changes, you can comment over here and again, update the status so that everyone can see what it is that they need to do. So let's say this one requires revisions. It flows down into this section here. Or you can say something is ready for publishing, in which case it goes down into a separate section. And back to our presentation here. It was also a really compelling just a success story, because what happened was that the 2 teams stopped having so many ad hoc communication and emails and just loose tracking between Slack, email, and tapping people on the shoulder, and they can actually get all of their information housed under one roof so that there's way more effective collaboration. And there's a lot of time saved, just people aren't chasing deadlines, aren't trying to find out through different tools on what is the most up-to-date information on a particular event.
Awesome.
Right.
Very good.
And these are set up for the conference as templates. So if you would like, I'll just drop the form in the chat. Let's see, how do I drop this in the chat?
Yeah.
If you go to the comments section and then toward the bottom, join.
Yep. And we'll I'll grab that and put it in our show notes as well.
Yeah. Perfect.
Very cool. So yeah, anybody in the education space or any space, you can, if you want to work with Cherry and team, Clarabase. And if you're wondering, I think the last time you on the show, you've since had a rebrand. So before it was AirOps and now Clarabase. So
yeah, that's right. We did rebrand earlier this year.
Yep. So it's now here. We'll put it in. I'll put it in the public one so people can see.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I had some trouble connecting to that comment section.
Okay, I just posted there. Okay, so if you're watching, check the comment feed. The link is there. We'll also put it on our show notes. Thank you, Cherry. Always good to have you back. And check out, you can find Cherry at clarabase.com. Let's go back here.
One more announcement. We
Okay.
do have our course that we launched a couple of years ago, and we're going to be making that just publicly available. Obviously, a lot of the content, like interfaces, has changed a ton since 2 years ago. We just want to share that with the community, in that there's a lot of good content from a strategic perspective, though you will want to do your own exploration around some of the new features.
Awesome.
So that will be on our website, claribase.com, and it will be coming out in November.
Very good. Yeah, I know there's great content there. So check it out, claribase.com. Okay, let's keep going. All right, Alli, let's learn about Junction Tables.
All right. My internet keeps cutting out, so if I do, I apologize in advance. All right. So I'm just going to go over like an abbreviated version of the talk I did at Daretable. And I'll go kind of more into the bases that live behind this as well. So I'm sure if you have been watching the show for a while, and if you've been in Airtable in the community for a while, or in databases in general, you probably have heard the term Junction Table tossed around. It is quite a difficult concept to grasp until you have your aha moment. I think for me, it really just took me kind of building a bunch of them, and I didn't even know that they were junction tables until afterwards, and I was reflecting on it, and I was like, oh wait, I've been doing that the whole time. Or not the whole time, but it kind of takes a little while, I think, to really train your brain to think in terms of a database as opposed to a spreadsheet. So I kind of went over just a very basic comparison of spreadsheets and databases, which we won't get super far into right now, but the main point around this slide is around data relationships, whereas spreadsheets are pretty weak in that realm. They really don't track the relationships between data as well as a database does, which that's really the whole crux of a database, is to be able to support complex relationships across those many tables that you might have. Let me put this in present mode really quickly. Can you still see this?
Yep.
Okay, great. So there are 3 types of data relationships. There's one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. When we're talking about one-to-one relationships, those are in Airtable specifically, those are in most databases, those are the things that you're going to see on the same table. So those are, when we're talking about people, for example, that's going to be your fields like your first name, last name, email, although you could argue that really any one data point is not a one-to-one relationship. So take these examples with a grain of salt, because it depends on your use case. You might have something that in one person's build is a one-to-one relationship, but it might be a one-to-many. In what you need it for, it's kind of hard to define one-to-one, I think. But typically, the point is these are the things that you're going to find on the same table. One-to-many relationships are getting a little bit more complex, and those are typically modeled on 2 tables. So you might have a list of your customers and a list of invoices. Those customers might have many invoices, but each invoice is only going to belong to one customer. Another example is websites and web pages, where each website might have one or more web page, but each web page only belongs to one website. And those are the things you're going to see on 2 tables that are linked together. Then when we get into many-to-many, things are getting super complicated. Those are the elements where you've got many things might be linked to many things. So 2 examples of that are pretty classic are students and classes, or events and attendees. So in both cases, you've got many things that might be linked to many things. Many students can enroll in many classes, and many classes can have many students, and same thing with events and attendees. Many-to-many relationships are where things get difficult, I think, when you're learning how to transition out of spreadsheet mode and into database mode. And they're really kind of difficult, I think, for beginners to kind of conceptualize the best way to model those. And typically those are modeled using 3 tables, including a junction table in the middle of those. So we will talk about exactly what a junction table is. And I'm really happy with this slide and the animation that I'm going to show in a second, because I think it does a really good job of visualizing exactly what a junction table is doing when we're looking at this graphic for a many-to-many relationship. A junction table is going to be a third table in between the 2 tables that have a many-to-many relationship. It acts as an intermediary by normalizing that data down to its lowest possible level. So in the concept of students and classes, we might have a junction table that has every record on it is 1 student and 1 class. And that way you can kind of group together from other tables things in relation to that specific intersection of that specific student and specific class. So this is the animation that I'm talking about, where this is the junction table in the center here, and these might be students, these might be classes, where we're kind of bringing everything together into this central location, and it makes it much easier to model your data. A couple of examples of that: we've got events and attendees, students and classes, which you might actually call enrollments, orders and products, and instead of order products, you might call those line items. Another pretty classic example. Also before I jump into the base, this is actually a nice slide as well. So this is kind of how my brain thinks about when kind of stepping through whether or not I need a junction table. So if you have a many-to-many relationship, or if you don't have one, rather, you can just go straight to no. You don't need a junction table. There's no need to overly complicate things. If it's not a many-to-many relationship, you can just model it with either 1 table or 2. And then if you do, there's another question that I ask myself, because unfortunately, there are record limits in Airtable. So sometimes, even if you have a many-to-many relationship, if you don't need to track the specifics about each of those relationships, you might be able to get away without a junction table. There's a lot of nuance to that, but in general, this is a very simplified version of kind of my little mind map for when I'm trying to decide if I need a junction table or not. And when I talk about the specifics here, these are the things that I'm talking about, which are, in this example for events and attendees, you might need to track the RSVP status of each attendee or the meal choice that they've made for that particular event. If you're needing to track those things, you probably need a junction table in the middle. Whereas if you just need to know who attended and how many people there were, you could probably get away with just the events and attendees tables without the junction table in the middle. Same with students and classes. If you need to track like their final grade in the class or the date they were enrolled in the class, you're going to need an enrollments table as your junction table. Orders and products, I'm talking about things like the quantity of each product, the total price of each line, that would live on this junction table in the middle. So I kind of went into a specific example, and if you were listening to last week's episode, Scott went into a very similar example when he was talking about how to get the data in the right format for a pivot table, and basically laid out exactly what I've got laid out here, which is that a lot of people might start off when they're like, I don't know, I only have these 2 tables, students and classes, and if I need to add final grades to make a pretty dashboard, I don't know where to put them. And so they might kind of try and shoehorn that data into the base by adding what I call adding fields in what I call a horizontal approach, by saying, all right, I'm going to add multiple fields, one for each class, and be able to record the grades on the students table, which unfortunately is not a scalable solution. If you have new classes, you need to add new fields. If you have formulas to like try and calculate the average, every time you add a new class, you need to edit that formula. Your interfaces are going to become next to impossible to design. It's going to make your life more difficult later on, whether or not you realize it immediately. It's really not the best approach or the most efficient approach. So instead, you should try and think vertically about your data, which is aiming for 1 field per data element. So if I need to add grades, and when I really only have 1 field that I'm adding grades to, instead of having multiple fields going across, I want to have 1 field going vertically. This slide I'm also very happy with, and I think that really in this blue square is a pretty good solid thing to walk away with, which is kind of, these are like my red flags for if I'm looking at somebody's structure or even my own structure. If I find myself adding fields or tables that have months or years in the names, that's kind of a tip off to start thinking I really should probably rethink the structure here. The names of records elsewhere in the database, like in the example I showed earlier, having like art history grade or computer basics grade, those are also the names of classes I have on a different table. So it doesn't really make sense to have a specific field on a different table for that class, if that makes sense. And then numbers in my field names, like class number 1 grade, class number 2 grade, or you might have, if you've got like trying to model line items and you don't have that junction table, you might have like product 1 quantity, product 1 amount, product 2 quantity, blah, 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 going like these groups of fields that are numbered. These are all things that can kind of tip you off to rethink your structure. And if you have the correct structure, in air quotes, for any one use case, your users should only need to add new records. You shouldn't rely on them adding new fields for them to use your solution. And very briefly, I'll just look at, this is the example base that I had started. I didn't get to bring this up in the actual presentation at Daretable, but I'm happy to share the links to these bases if anyone would like to see them. So this is what people might start doing, is adding these fields going across. But then if I need to get the average for any one student, I've got to have this big formula that's averaging these out. And if I add more classes, I need to edit this formula. And it gets even more complicated if I want to find the average grade per class, because I've put all of these fields on the student table. On the classes table, if I want to find the average grade, I need to add roll-ups for each class and then have another field that's like a switch statement or a big nested if to say, okay, if it's this class name, do this field, this class name, do that field, blah, blah, blah. It's just not scalable. It's going to be inevitably something you forget to do later on. So really, you should aim for a table like this, where we have every record is 1 student, 1 class, 1 grade, and that you can continue forward. And then if you needed to be able to reuse this base for next semester or next school year, you could just have another table, another junction table. There's so many junction tables when you're talking about students and classes that you might need to use. But you could have classes per semester, roll everything up to a student semester table or student school year table, kind of go up and up and up. But this way, this table really becomes the crux of your data entry for class over class, year over year, whatever it is you need to model. And it allows you to build an interface that looks something like this, where you can then filter this down by just a specific class. And you're able to see, okay, the average grade for the class, the highest, the lowest, etc. Where if I didn't have this junction table, this would just not be possible to do in a single dashboard. You might be able to do it by having 20 different dashboards, one for each class, but no one wants to do that, I don't think. Yeah, that is basically it. I could keep going.
Awesome. Yeah, we can. Very cool. Yeah, this is great. So yeah, if you're willing to share those links, we can put it in the notes. And that's a fundamental aspect of database design. So if you're not familiar with how that works, that's very important to learn that. And thank you, Alli, for sharing that.
Of course.
Okay.
I love how you laid out
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
tree.
What was that, Jerry?
I love how you laid out the decision tree. That's very
yeah. Thank you. I was happy with how that came out too. Thank you.
Okay, if you're not in the BuiltOnAir community, join us for a great community, thousands of users in our Slack community, a newsletter that goes out that keeps you up to date on everything going on in not only the Airtable world, but the bigger no-code, low-code space. So join us, builtonair.com/join. It's free to join. No reason not to, so get in today. Looks like Jen missed it again. You can watch the replay, Jen, of our podcast. All right, Camille, let's wrap up with our approval process.
So when I presented at Daretable, my topic was about approval workflows and how you could build them in Airtable without needing any sort of additional tools, no scripts, no integrations, etc. And I walked through 3 examples, simple, complex, and advanced, all under the same sort of use case of you are interviewing applicants for one or more jobs. So the first one is simple, was pretty simple. For all applications, you would have one person review them all, and that person was always the same person. Then we got a little bit more complex where it was a 2-step approval process where you could configure who reviews step 1 and step 2, depending on which department it was in. And then the third one was even more complicated, where it could be any number of approval steps. It could be 1, it could be 10, and allowing you to customize who approves each step per department as well. So in the overview I went through for all 3 examples, I got the gist of them all, but there's a particular portion of this example that I wanted to go over, and that's the mechanism I have in there to determine what is the current step, because if there's a variable number of steps, how can you accurately determine this application is on step 2 and this one is on step 5? And then this is just vindication for me. In the slides that I prepared, there's a space in between we're and going, but as it was on screen, it kind of got squished together. And the entire time I was panicking of, did I have a typo? And no, I didn't. It was there and it was correct. It was just formatted weird. But anyway, here was the example, and I'll pull up the interface really quickly. It's for a little bit more of a visual. So let me go into something that's active. We have a application where, similar to Alli's presentation just now, this is a junction table, if anyone wants to get really deep into these examples, where we have each record is a application and it's linked to a particular job. And then there are interview steps related to this application. And so in this particular case, we've determined that any job that's in the Department of IT has 3 approval steps. I'm the first approver, then it goes to Clark Kent, and then it goes to Bruce Wayne. And the general idea of my approach was, depending on who you are, in this case, I'm Camille Parks, I'm the first approver, I can go to this section up at the top and mark my approval, and I'll say, yep, let's move them along in the process, and now I'm no longer the current reviewer. So this down here is a non-editable sort of just history log of the interview timeline, but I can see that the current step indicator moved along into the next one, which is step 2. So that's the part I wanted to go over in a little bit more detail, just so that we could see how it works. So in the interviews table, you can see that I have, in this case, 3 records that are all linked to the same application. And then this formula field, that's my current step indicator. I have a couple other important lookup fields that are somewhat specific to this particular implementation, but the general idea is the same. So I'll work my way into how I created the current step indicator, and we'll look at the formula last. So the first things first, this is a sequential process determined by the interview steps table, which is basically a template table where for the Department of IT, there's 3 steps, and for the Department of Sales, there's 1 step. There's not going to be many more records in this table. It really depends on how many departments there are and how many steps each department will have. But the actual specific interviews that are taking place are over here. When a new application is submitted, I create new interview records based on whatever department it's in, and that copies over the step number, so everything gets to be created in sequence. So now I know which order these interview steps should be presented in based on the step number field. Well, back on the applications table, the next thing I want to do is have a field that tells me, for this particular application, what is the current step number? And that is determined by a roll-up field. Now, this has a little bit of extra logic than mightn't be necessary for your particular use case. Normally, you probably can get away with just having a roll-up that's looking at a numeric field, in this case, step number from my interviews, and pulling the minimum value, the lowest value out of there. But I also have additional logic in here where I'm saying, don't give me any records that have already been decided as yes, we're moving forward, or not applicable. Now, I also have another status of thumbs down. I didn't include that in the in my logic, simply because there's a timing component of, first I want to notify the next approver to do something, and if not approved is still in there, it kind of messed with some of my automations. So generally speaking, if you're following along and trying to take the sort of step indicator idea, you probably don't need this part. It's just this particular build, that's what was necessary. So now I know for a particular application, what is the lowest number step that is considered active. Well, now I want to bring that back on to the interview records themselves. So the current step number from application is another roll-up pointing from the application of that roll-up that I just talked about. In this case, it's another min values with no extra logic, because each of these interviews is only linked to one application, so I don't really need any additional information. So now I know that the whole application is on step 1, and then the individual step number for each interview for that application. So now what the formula is doing is it's comparing this number against this number. Well, 1 is equal to 1, so that's the step number. And then 1 is not equal to 2, so that's why this one's not checked. Same thing as 1 is not equal to 3. But this formula is a little bit more complex than that even. Again, this has to do with a timing issue. Normally, you could just do, is the current step number from the application equal to the step number of this interview? If true, then output true. Otherwise, output false. And then I have a formatting here where instead of having it format as a number, format it as a checkbox with a circle, and that's why it looks so nice on an interface. But the additional things I'm checking for one of two conditions. This is one condition, and this is another condition. It's all wrapped in an OR. So first I want to check if the current step number equals the step number for this interview. In this case, that is true for 1. And then I want to make sure that there are any decisions that are made for this application. In this case, again, it's a timing thing based on how I built this example. All interviews come in with no status, and then the first interview gets marked as pending after the fact. And then what I also want to check is if the overall status of the application is not declined, because if the whole application is declined, then there is no interview. We're done interviewing. The application is declined. The second set of conditions I'm checking for is if the current step number is less than or equal to 1 and the current step is 1. So when all of these come in, it's possible, again, a factor of timing, that the current step number is 0 because there's no linked records yet. So that's why I'm checking for less than or equal to 1. And then similarly, I'm checking if there's not any decisions made yet. And lastly, of course, if it's declined, then we don't need to move forward at all. So additional logic that's put in here that is not necessarily needed for every particular use case. It's just what I came up with to get this particular example to work. So if we really quickly look at something that was declined, we'll notice that it has no approval active current step. The whole thing is over. That's it.
Awesome. That's a great formula, great
Cool.
formatting.
And it's already available under my creator account in the Airtable universe, along with some stuff from forever ago that I've placed on there. All 3 examples I went over, the simple, complex, and advanced. If you signed up during my presentation, you will get an email with all of the links directly to them. So I just had to do a little bit of cleanup before I was ready.
Nice. And I can't remember, from the universe, do the interfaces come through when you...
Yes.
Okay.
So originally what I was going to do was just click a share link and share publicly. It came with the base and the interface, but not the automations. And with this particular example, they're kind of important. So none of this would really work all that well without the automations. So that's why I went with the universe, where all 3 are present.
But it doesn't, when you click on this, the preview does not show the interfaces. Is that correct?
So if I just look at the simple one, which does have an interface attached to it, if you hit explore the base, it has extensions, because that's how old the interface, the universe is, but no really way to look at those interfaces.
Yeah, they need to add that. That would be a game changer for their universe.
Yes.
No doubt.
Awesome. Thank you all. So yeah, there we got just our mini Daretable in 1 hour. The 3 best episodes of Daretable joining us on BuiltOnAir. Well, thank you, Cherry. Thank you again for joining. And we'll have you back on in the future and get an update. And everybody, we will see you all next week.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to check out our sponsor, OnToAir Backups, automated backups for Airtable. We'll see you next time on the BuiltOnAir podcast.